I was zipping up my jacket, car keys already in my hand, ready to head out for my grandson's 7th birthday dinner at my son's house. Then my phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. 3 words that stopped me cold. Call me now, don't go there. I stared at those words like they were written in a language I didn't quite understand. My lawyer didn't text me. We talked maybe twice a year, always scheduled, always about routine estate stuff, and he certainly didn't tell me not to see my own family. I sat down on the edge of my bed, jacket still on, and called him. He picked up before the first ring finished. His voice was tight, controlled, the way it gets when someone's trying not to yell. He said, "Check your email, right now, before you go anywhere." I opened my laptop with hands that had started to shake without my permission. The email was there, subject line, "Evidence you need to see." 3 attachments. I clicked the first one. It was a scanned legal document, dated 8 weeks ago, a petition to declare me mentally incompetent, filed by Marcus William Brennan, my son, my only son. The room seemed to tilt slightly to the left. I read the document again, slower this time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't. Marcus had gone to court claiming I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, that I posed a danger to myself, that I needed a legal guardian to make decisions for me. That guardian, according to the petition, should be him. Before I dive in, tell me in the comments section if it's justifiable seeing your own son declaring you mentally incompetent to manage your affair without your notice, and hit the subscribe button now, because it helps me sharing more. I scrolled to the second document, a financial power of attorney form, already drafted, already notarized, just waiting for a judge's signature. If this went through, Marcus would control everything. My house, my bank accounts, my retirement savings, everything my wife Eleanor and I had spent 50 years building together. The third file made my stomach drop. It was an email chain between Marcus and someone named Trevor Calloway. The signature line identified him as an estate liquidation specialist. They were talking about my house, the house where I'd raised Marcus and his sister Lydia. The house where Eleanor had died in my arms 3 years ago, her hand in mine, her last words asking me to take care of the garden she loved. Marcus had written, "Once the conservatorship goes through, we can move fast. He won't have any say in it. The property's worth at least $800,000 in this market, probably more if we stage it right." Trevor replied, "I can have an appraisal done next week. I've got 3 investors who'd bid sight unseen in that neighborhood. We could close in 30 days, maybe less." I sat there staring at the screen until the words blurred into blue and white shapes. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped steel cables around my ribs and was pulling them tighter with every breath I tried to take. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to throw a baseball. The kid who'd cried in my arms when his goldfish died. The young man I'd helped through college, through his divorce, through every financial crisis he'd ever stumbled into. And he was trying to erase me. My lawyer's voice came back through the phone. I'd forgotten I hadn't hung up. He said, "I found out through a colleague in probate court. Marcus filed this quietly, through a different county. He didn't expect you'd ever know until the hearing was over." I asked him when the hearing was scheduled. He said, 9 days, Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. 9 days, just over a week before a judge would decide if I still had the right to control my own life. I asked what my options were. He paused, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. He said, "We fight it. We file a contest, we gather evidence that you're fully competent, and we show the judge this is about money, not concern. But you need to understand something. If you show up at that dinner tonight, Marcus will know you're onto him. He might accelerate the process, file emergency motions, freeze your accounts before you can react." I said, what if I don't go?" He said, Then you buy us time, time to build a case, time to line up witnesses and documentation, time to prepare for a fight he doesn't think you're capable of. I looked at the photo on my dresser. Eleanor in her garden, kneeling in the dirt with her hands full of tomatoes, smiling at the camera like she had just discovered something wonderful. She'd always said Marcus was ambitious. She'd meant it as a compliment. I wondered what she'd say now if she could see these documents. I told my lawyer I'd call him back in an hour. I needed to think. I hung up and just sat there in the silence of my bedroom, jacket still on, car keys still in my hand. The invitation to Ethan's birthday party was propped up on my nightstand. My grandson had made it himself, construction paper and markers, a crayon drawing of the two of us fishing together. He'd written Grandpa in wobbly blue letters across the top. I picked it up and traced those letters with my thumb. Did Marcus really think I'd just disappear? That I'd hand over my entire life and shuffle off quietly into whatever corner he'd decided was appropriate for me? Maybe he did. Maybe he looked at me and saw someone too old, too tired, too worn down by grief to fight back. Maybe he thought 3 years of missing Eleanor had hollowed me out and left nothing behind but an empty shell he could manipulate with legal paperwork and concerned expressions. He was wrong. I stood up and took off my jacket, hung it carefully back in the closet, set my car keys on the dresser. I wasn't going to that birthday dinner. Not tonight. Not until I understood the full scope of what my son had planned. Not until I had a plan of my own. I sat back down at my laptop and opened a new document, started making lists. Every asset I owned, every account, every investment, every piece of property. I wanted to see it all laid out in front of me so I knew exactly what Marcus was trying to take. The house was the centerpiece. 800,000, he'd said, maybe more. But there was also my retirement account, still healthy despite the market fluctuations. The cabin upstate where Eleanor and I used to spend summers, just the two of us, and the lake and the quiet. A small investment portfolio I'd built carefully over the years. Nothing flashy, but enough to live on comfortably for the rest of my life. And then there was the thing Marcus didn't know about. A safety deposit box at a bank across town. Inside it was $50,000 in cash, along with Eleanor's jewelry and some old bonds I'd never cashed. I'd set it up years ago as an emergency fund, back when I still worried about recessions and bank failures. I'd never told anyone about it, not even Eleanor toward the end, when her mind started slipping and I didn't want to burden her with financial details. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, and it was hidden. I made a note to visit the bank first thing tomorrow morning. If Marcus was going to try freezing my accounts, I needed to make sure I had access to cash, room to move, resources to fight without being financially strangled. Then I started a second list. Witnesses, people who could testify that I was sharp, independent, fully capable of managing my own life. Dorothy from next door, who I played chess with twice a week, and who beat me about half the time. My doctor, who'd given me a clean bill of health at my physical just 2 months ago. My financial advisor who'd watched me manage my portfolio without a single misstep. Even Gerald from the hardware store, who I'd been talking to about a deck repair project I was planning for the spring. All of them could confirm I wasn't some confused old man wandering around lost in my own life, and I was present, I was functional, I was here. By the time I finished both lists, it was almost 8 o'clock. The birthday dinner would be starting right about now. I imagined Marcus checking his watch, wondering where I was, maybe calling my cell phone, maybe telling Ethan that Grandpa wasn't feeling well, but sent his love, or maybe he suspected I knew. Maybe he was sitting at his dining room table right now, trying to figure out if his plan had been compromised. I didn't care. Let him wonder. I picked up my phone and typed out a message to Marcus. Not feeling well tonight, going to skip dinner. Hope Ethan has a wonderful time. I watched the little delivered notification appear under the text. Then 3 dots showed up. He was typing, the dots stopped, started again, stopped. Finally a message came through. No problem, Dad. Feel better. We'll celebrate another time. Love you. I stared at those last 2 words. Love you. So casual. So normal, like he wasn't in the middle of orchestrating a legal conspiracy to rob me of everything I'd spent my life building. Like he wasn't planning to lock me away in some facility where I'd have no voice, no choices, no control over my own existence. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to call him and scream every word I was thinking, but my lawyer's voice echoed in my head. Don't let him know you're onto him. Not yet. So I just typed back, thanks. Give Ethan a big hug for me. Then I set the phone down and stared at the wall. What would you do if your own son did this to you? Would you confront him immediately, or would you stay quiet and build your case in the shadows? I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Marcus had made a terrible miscalculation. He'd looked at me and seen weakness, seen grief, seen an old man who'd lost his wife and his purpose in his fight. He was wrong on all counts, and by the time I was finished, he was going to understand exactly how wrong he'd been. I opened my email and started composing a message to my lawyer. Subject line, I'm ready to fight. I listed everything I'd thought of, the witnesses, the documentation, the safety deposit box. I asked him what else we'd need. What kind of evidence would convince a judge that this wasn't about my well-being at all, but about a son who saw his father as a financial opportunity? He replied within 20 minutes. His message was short. This is good. We can work with this. Come to my office tomorrow at 10. We'll start building the case. And one more thing, he wrote. Don't contact Marcus. Don't explain yourself. Don't give him any indication that you know what's happening. Let him think you're exactly what he believes you are. Confused, isolated, easy to manipulate. We'll show him the truth in court. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet house. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside I could hear the neighborhood settling into evening. A dog barking somewhere. A car driving past. Normal sounds, normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. I got up and walked through the house, room by room. The living room where Eleanor and I used to watch old movies on Friday nights. The kitchen where she'd taught me to make her mother's lasagna recipe. The bedroom where I still slept on my side of the bed. Even though there was no reason to anymore, this was my home, my life, my history, and Marcus thought he could just take it, sell it, erase it like it meant nothing. I stopped in front of the bookshelf in the hallway. There was a photo there, taken about 15 years ago. Marcus and Lydia and their families, all of us together at the cabin for 4th of July. Everyone was smiling. Eleanor had her arm around my waist. Marcus was holding Ethan, who was just a baby then, tiny and perfect. We'd been happy that day. I remembered it clearly. The grill going, the smell of burgers and hot dogs, the kids running around with sparklers after dark. It had felt like everything was exactly as it should be. When had that changed? When had Marcus started looking at me? Seeing dollar signs instead of his father, or had it always been there? Hidden under the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge? I didn't know, and maybe it didn't matter. What mattered now was making sure he didn't win. I went to bed that night but didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those documents, the petition, the emails, the cold, calculated planning behind every word. By 6 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I got dressed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table watching the sun come up through the window. Today, I'd start fighting back. Today, I'd begin the process of proving I wasn't the helpless old man Marcus thought I was. And somewhere, maybe 9 days from now in a courtroom, he'd realize he'd underestimated me. He'd picked a fight with someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. That was his first mistake. And I was going to make sure it was his last. I was standing outside the bank when they unlocked the doors at 9. The morning air was cold enough to see my breath, and I'd been waiting in my car for 20 minutes, watching the employees arrive and turn on the lights inside. I couldn't risk being late. Couldn't risk Marcus somehow finding out about the safety deposit box and moving faster than I could. The clerk who helped me was young, maybe 25, with neat hair and a tie that looked like it was strangling him. He checked my ID, verified my signature, and led me back to the vault without asking questions. That's what I appreciated about banks. They didn't need your life story. They just needed your identification and your key. He pulled the box from its slot in the wall and carried it to a small private room. Set it on the table and said, "Take your time. Just let me know when you're finished." Then he left and closed the door behind him. I stood there for a moment before opening the box. My hands were steadier than they'd been last night, but my heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I lifted the lid. Everything was exactly where I'd left it 3 years ago. The cash, bundled in hundreds and held together with rubber bands that had started to deteriorate slightly. Eleanor's wedding ring, the diamond catching the fluorescent light, the emerald earrings I'd given her for our 20th anniversary, the bonds, yellowed with age but still valid, and something I'd almost forgotten. A letter. Handwritten. Eleanor's handwriting, shaky and slanting in ways it never used to, but unmistakably hers. I picked it up carefully, like it might disintegrate if I held it too tightly. The envelope had my name on it, nothing else. I opened it and unfolded the paper inside. "My dearest," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm already gone. And I hope you're doing okay without me. I know you will be. You're stronger than you think, even when you don't feel like it. I wanted to leave you a few thoughts, things I didn't get to say clearly toward the end when my mind wasn't cooperating the way I wanted it to. First, don't let anyone make you feel small. You've lived a good life, a full life, and no one gets to take that away from you, not even family." I stopped reading and put the letter down on the table, took a breath, picked it up again. Not even family. Had she known? Had she seen something in Marcus that I'd missed? Even back then, when she was losing pieces of herself to the disease that eventually took her. The letter continued. "Second, take care of yourself. Don't let grief make you invisible. You matter. You've always mattered. You matter to me wherever I am now, and you matter to the people who really love you. Don't forget that. And third, if anyone ever tries to tell you you're not capable, don't you dare believe them. I've watched you fix engines and build furniture and navigate loss and hold our family together when everything was falling apart. You're not fragile. You're not weak. You're a fighter. Don't forget that either." I sat in that small room with the letter in my hands and let the tears come. I didn't make a sound. I just let them fall onto the paper, blurring the ink slightly in places. And I felt Eleanor with me in a way I hadn't felt since the morning she died. She was right. I was a fighter. I'd just forgotten for a while. Forgotten in the fog of grief and loneliness and the slow, quiet years that followed her death. But I remembered now. I carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, set it aside, Then I counted out $10,000 in cash and put it in a plain envelope I'd brought with me. The rest I left in the box. I wasn't emptying it, not yet. But I wanted money on hand that Marcus couldn't trace, couldn't freeze, couldn't touch. I closed the box and signaled for the clerk. He came back, returned the box to its slot, and I walked out of the bank with $10,000 in the inside pocket of my jacket, and Eleanor's words still echoing in my head. "You're a fighter. Don't forget that." My next stop was my lawyer's office. He worked out of a small building downtown, second floor, with a view of the street below and a waiting room that smelled like old coffee and paper. His receptionist, a woman named Karen, who'd been with him for at least 20 years, smiled when I walked in. She said, "He's expecting you. Go on back." I knocked on his door and he waved me in. His name was Peter Garrison, and he'd been handling my legal work since Eleanor and I bought the house 40 years ago. He was 70 now, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, and he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and said, "Tell me everything." I did. I walked him through the documents he'd sent, the petition, the emails, the timeline. I told him about the safety deposit box, about the witnesses I'd thought of, about the fact that Marcus had been asking questions for months, planting seeds, building a narrative. Peter listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers under his chin. He said, "This is worse than I thought." I said, "Well, worse how?" He said, "Because it's premeditated. He didn't wake up one day and panic about your well-being. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer, and that makes it harder to defend against because he'll have a story ready. But it also makes it easier to attack because premeditation shows intent." I said, "What do we do?" He pulled out a legal pad and started writing. He said, "First, we file a formal contest to the petition. That buys us time and forces a full evidentiary hearing. Second, we get you a comprehensive cognitive screening. I'm talking full neurological workup, not just a general physical. We need documentation that proves beyond any doubt that you're mentally competent." I said, "I can do that." He said, "Third, we start gathering affidavits from your witnesses, people who can testify to your day-to-day functionality. And fourth, we go after Trevor Calloway." I said, "The liquidation guy?" He nodded. He said, "I did some digging after I sent you those emails. Calloway's been involved in at least 4 other cases like this. Families trying to liquidate assets under questionable circumstances. 3 of those cases resulted in complaints to the State Consumer Protection Board. None of them went anywhere because the families settled quietly, but the pattern is there. If we can show the judge that your son specifically chose someone with a history of ethically dubious practices, it strengthens our argument that this isn't about your care. It's about cashing out." I said, "How do we prove that?" He said, "We depose Marcus, we put him under oath and make him explain every email, every conversation, every step he took, and we do it before the hearing so he doesn't have time to prepare a clean story." I felt something shift in my chest, not quite hope, but close, momentum maybe. The sense that I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was building something. Before I continue, you need to subscribe to Deserved Revenge channel because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. Hit that subscribe button now. Peter said, "There's one more thing we need to talk about." I said, "What?" He said, "Your daughter, Lydia, man. Have you told her what's happening?" I shook my head. I said, Not yet." He said, "You need to, because if Marcus has been asking her questions, trying to build a case that you're declining, we need to know what she said, and more importantly, we need to know whose side she's on." That thought had been sitting in the back of my mind since last night, a cold knot of dread I hadn't wanted to examine too closely. Lydia was Marcus's sister. They'd grown up together. They were close. Or at least they used to be. What if she believed him? What if she thought I really was declining, that Marcus was doing the right thing, that I was too stubborn or too proud to see it? Peter must have seen something in my face, because he said, "You won't know until you ask, but you need to ask soon, because if she's going to testify for him, we need to be prepared for that." I said, "And if she testifies for me?" He said, "Then we have a powerful witness, a daughter who can counter her brother's claims with first-hand observations. That carries weight." I nodded. I said, "I'll talk to her today." He said, "Good. In the meantime, I'll start the paperwork. We'll have the contest filed by end of business tomorrow, and I'll schedule your deposition of Marcus for early next week. The faster we move, the less time he has to maneuver." I stood up to leave, and Peter stopped me. He said, "One more thing. Don't contact Marcus. Don't try to talk to him. Don't try to reason with him. Let him think you're going along with whatever story he's telling himself. The element of surprise is the only advantage we have right now." I said, "Understood." I left his office and sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to decide how to approach Lydia. We talked every Sunday like clockwork. She'd call around noon, we'd chat for 20 or 30 minutes, and she'd update me on the kids and her husband and her life. Our next call wasn't for 5 more days, but I couldn't wait that long. I dialed her number. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and surprised. She said, "Dad, is everything okay?" I said, "I need to talk to you. In person. Can I come by tomorrow?" There was a pause. Then she said, "Of course. Is something wrong? Are you sick?" I said, "I'm not sick, but it's important." She said, "Okay, come by any time. We'll be here." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat there in the parking lot, staring at the phone in my hand, and tried to figure out how I was going to tell my daughter that her brother was trying to destroy me. The rest of the day I spent preparing. I went to see Dr. Patel, my primary care physician, and explained what I needed. He didn't ask many questions, just nodded, and said he'd schedule a full cognitive screening for the next afternoon. He also said he'd prepare a written statement confirming my medical history and current health status. Then I stopped by Dorothy's house next door. She was in her front yard pulling weeds from the flower bed, and she waved when she saw me. I told her I might need her to write a letter, maybe even testify in court about my mental sharpness. She didn't hesitate. She said, "Of course, what's this about?" I gave her the short version. My son was trying to have me declared incompetent. She put down her gardening gloves and stared at me. She said, "That boy? The one who used to mow my lawn when he was in high school?" I nodded. She said, "Well, he's an idiot. You beat me at chess 3 times last week." I said, "Twice." She said, 3. You're forgetting the game on Thursday." I smiled despite everything. She was right, she said. "I'll write whatever you need, and I'll show up in court if that's what it takes. That boy doesn't know what he's messing with." I thanked her and headed home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was late afternoon. The house felt emptier than usual. I made myself a sandwich I didn't really want and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Just checking in, Dad. Haven't heard from you since last night. Everything okay?" I stared at the message. So casual, so normal, like he wasn't counting down the days until a judge handed him control of my entire life. I typed back, "I'm fine. Just needed to rest." He replied immediately, "Good. Let me know if you need anything. Love you." There it was again. Love you. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Looked out at the backyard. Eleanor's garden was still there, overgrown now, but still recognizable. I hadn't been able to bring myself to tear it out after she died. Hadn't been able to touch it at all, really, but maybe it was time. Maybe it was time to start taking care of the things she'd loved, the things she'd left behind, instead of just letting them fade. I went outside and stood at the edge of the garden. The tomatoes had gone wild, sprawling everywhere. The herbs were mostly weeds now. But the rosebush she'd planted 20 years ago was still alive, still blooming in defiant little bursts of red. I knelt down and started pulling weeds. It felt good to use my hands, to do something concrete and real. And as I worked, I thought about what Peter had said. The element of surprise is the only advantage we have. Marcus thought he knew me, thought he understood exactly who I was and what I was capable of. He was about to find out how wrong he was. 3 days after my lawyer's warning, I still hadn't spoken to Marcus. He'd sent 2 texts asking how I was feeling, both of them light and casual, and I'd responded with equally bland reassurances. I'm fine, just needed rest. Meanwhile, I was quietly assembling a case that would rip his petition apart. My lawyer called that morning with an update. He'd filed a response to Marcus's incompetency claim, formally contesting it and requesting a full evidentiary hearing. That meant Marcus would have to present actual proof that I was unfit, and I'd have the chance to present proof that I wasn't. He also told me he'd started digging into Trevor Calloway. Turns out the complaint I'd found wasn't the only one. There were 3 others, all quietly settled out of court, all involving similar accusations: undervalued properties, rushed sales, suspiciously low appraisals. My lawyer said, "This guy's a vulture, and your son picked him for a reason." I asked what the next step was. He said, "We go on the offensive. We show the court that Marcus isn't acting out of concern. He's acting out of greed, and we make sure the judge sees exactly who he is." That sounded good to me. But there was something else I needed to do, something my lawyer couldn't help with. I needed to talk to my daughter. Lydia lived 2 hours away with her husband and their 2 kids. We didn't see each other as often as I'd like, but we stayed close. She called every Sunday, sent photos of the grandkids, remembered my birthday. She was the kind of daughter who still felt like family. I hadn't told her what Marcus was doing. I wasn't sure how she'd react. Marcus was her brother. They'd grown up together, fought together, protected each other. Would she believe me, or would she think I was confused, paranoid, slipping into the very incompetence Marcus was claiming? I decided I had to risk it. I called her that afternoon. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and warm. She said, "Hey, Dad, I was just thinking about you." "How are you?" I said. "I need to talk to you about something. In person. Can I come by tomorrow?" Her tone shifted immediately. She said, "Is everything okay? Are you sick?" I said, "I'm fine, but it's important." She hesitated, then said, "Of course, come by any time. We'll be here." I thanked her and hung up. Then I spent the rest of the day rehearsing what I'd say. How do you tell your daughter that her brother is trying to destroy you? The drive to Lydia's house the next morning felt longer than usual. I kept running through different versions of the conversation in my head, trying to find the words that wouldn't sound crazy. By the time I pulled into her driveway, I still didn't have a script. I was just going to have to trust that she'd listen. She met me at the door with a hug and a worried smile. Her husband Greg was at work, and the kids were at school, so it was just the 2 of us. She made coffee, and we sat at her kitchen table, the same table where we'd had 100 conversations over the years. I didn't waste time. I pulled out my phone and showed her the documents my lawyer had sent. The incompetency petition. The power of attorney. The emails between Marcus and Trevor. She read in silence, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something darker. When she finished, she set the phone down and stared at me. She said, "This can't be real." I said, "Yes, it is." She shook her head slowly. She said, "Marcus wouldn't do this. He wouldn't." I said, "I didn't think so either, but..." The documents are real, the court date is real, and if I don't fight this, I lose everything. She picked up the phone again and scrolled back through the emails. I watched her face as she read Marcus's words. Once the conservatorship goes through, we can move fast. He won't have any say. Her hands were shaking. She said, "Why would he do this?" I said, money, control, maybe both. I don't know. She looked up at me and I saw tears in her eyes. She said, "He's been asking me questions about you, about how you're doing, if you're handling things okay on your own. I thought he was just worried." I felt a chill run through me. I said, What kind of questions?" She said, "Things like, does Dad seem confused when you talk to him? Has he forgotten anything important? Is he keeping up with bills and appointments? I told him you were fine. I said you were doing great, all things considered." I said he was building a case. "He was trying to get you to confirm that I was slipping." She put her face in her hands. She said, "I can't believe this. He's my brother." I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. I said, "I know, and I'm sorry, but I need you to believe me, and I need your help." She looked up, wiping her eyes. She said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to testify at the hearing. I need you to tell the court that I'm competent, that Marcus has been manipulating this situation, and that he's not acting in my best interest." She nodded immediately. She said, "I'll do it, whatever you need." Relief washed over me. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Does Marcus know you found out?" I said, "Not yet. I've been keeping my distance, pretending everything's normal." She said, "Good. Don't let him know." "Not until you're ready." We talked for another hour. She told me more about the questions Marcus had asked, the way he'd framed them as concern, the subtle ways he'd tried to plant doubt about my capability. She also told me something I didn't know. Marcus had asked her a month ago if she'd be willing to co-sign on a loan. He'd said it was for a business investment, something time-sensitive that he needed to move on quickly. She'd said no, she didn't have the cash to back a loan that size, and she didn't feel comfortable signing on to something she didn't fully understand. Now, looking back, she wondered if that loan was a backup plan, a way to get money if the conservatorship didn't go through. I made a note to tell my lawyer. Every piece of this puzzle mattered. Before I left, Lydia hugged me tight. She said, "We're going to stop him."
"Dad, I promise." I believed her. "If you're still with me, you won't believe what happens next. Drop a comment below with your country so I know you're here." On the drive home, I felt something close to hope. I had my lawyer. I had documentation. I had witnesses. And now I had my daughter in my corner. Marcus had underestimated me. But more than that, he'd underestimated the people who actually cared about me. People who weren't going to stand by and let him erase me without a fight. When I got home, there was a voicemail on my phone from Marcus. His voice was casual, friendly even. He said, "Hey Dad, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a few days. Let me know you're okay. Love you." I deleted it without responding. 2 days later, my lawyer called with news. He said, "We've got a hearing date, 2 weeks from today."
And I've got something else, a deposition request. We're calling Marcus to answer questions under oath before the hearing. I asked what that meant. He said, "It means he's going to have to explain on the record why he filed this petition, and if he lies, we'll have grounds to destroy his credibility in court." I said, do it. He said, "One more thing. I reached out to Trevor Calloway's office, posing as a potential client. I recorded the conversation. He practically admitted that he specializes in quick turnaround sales for families looking to liquidate assets, before an estate gets complicated. He didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. He helps people cash out before anyone can object. I said, "Can we use that?" He said, "Absolutely. It shows intent. It shows your son wasn't planning to care for you. He was planning to sell everything and pocket the money." I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Marcus thought he'd covered his tracks, but he'd left a trail, and we were following it straight to him. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Marcus, not to the court. To Ethan, my grandson. I didn't know when I'd give it to him. Maybe not for years. Maybe not until he was old enough to understand. But I wanted him to know the truth. I wanted him to know that his grandfather fought back, that I didn't go quietly, that I refused to be erased. I started the letter with, "Your father tried to take everything from me, but I didn't let him. And I want you to know why." The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at my lawyer's office. Marcus didn't know I'd be there. My lawyer advised me to stay visible but silent, to let Marcus see me and understand that I wasn't some confused old man he could brush aside. I arrived early and sat in the corner of the conference room, my hands folded on the table. When Marcus walked in with his own lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with a tight smile, he froze. For just a second, his mask slipped. I saw surprise, maybe even fear. Then he recovered, smiled and said, "Dad, I didn't know you'd be here." I didn't smile back, I just said, "I wanted to hear what you have to say." His lawyer glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable, then gestured for everyone to sit. My lawyer started the questioning. He asked Marcus to state, for the record, why he'd filed the petition for conservatorship. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his tone measured and calm. He said, "I'm concerned about my father's well-being. He's been isolated since my mother passed. He's not handling things the way he used to. I thought it would be best if someone was looking out for him." My lawyer said, "Can you give specific examples of behavior that concerned you?" Marcus hesitated. Then he said, "He's forgotten appointments. He seems confused sometimes when we talk. He's not keeping up with the house the way he used to." My lawyer said, "Has he missed any bills, defaulted on any payments, had any medical emergencies due to neglect?" Marcus said, "Not that I know of." My lawyer said, "So he's managing his finances, his health, and his household independently?" Marcus's lawyer cut in. She said, "My client is expressing concern based on observations over time. This isn't about a single incident." My lawyer ignored her. He slid a document across the table. He said, "This is a cognitive screening completed by your father's doctor 4 days ago. It shows no signs of impairment. Would you like to review it?" Marcus glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up. He said, "I'm sure my father can perform well on a test when he's motivated. That doesn't mean he's capable of managing everything on his own." My lawyer said, "Let's talk about Trevor Calloway." Marcus went very still. My lawyer continued. He said, "You've been in contact with Mr. Calloway regarding the sale of your father's home. Can you explain why you'd be discussing the sale of a property you don't own?" Marcus's lawyer started to object, but my lawyer held up a hand. He said, "These are emails your client sent. They're part of the record. I'm simply asking him to clarify his intent." Marcus said, "I was exploring options in case Dad needed to move into a care facility. I wanted to know what the house was worth." My lawyer said, "Did your father ask you to explore those options?" Marcus said, "No, but I didn't think he'd be objective about it." My lawyer leaned forward. He said, "Did you, at any point, discuss with your father the possibility of selling his home?" Marcus said, "No." My lawyer said, "So you took it upon yourself to contact a liquidation specialist discuss appraisals, and plan a sale, all without your father's knowledge or consent. Marcus's lawyer objected again, but the damage was done. I could see it in Marcus's face. He knew how it looked. My lawyer pressed further. He asked about the loan Marcus had tried to get Lydia to co-sign. He asked about the timing of the conservatorship petition, filed just weeks after that loan fell through. He asked if Marcus had any financial difficulties that might motivate him to seek control of his father's assets. Marcus's answers got shorter, tighter. He denied everything, but his denials sounded hollow. By the time the deposition ended, I could see the cracks in his facade. He wouldn't look at me as he left the room. I stayed behind with my lawyer. He said, "That went better than I expected. He's going to have a hard time explaining those emails in front of a judge." I said, What happens next?" He said, "We prepare for the hearing. We bring in your witnesses. We present the cognitive screening, the financial records, everything that shows you're fully capable, and we let the judge see exactly what your son was trying to do." I nodded. I felt steady, focused. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to confront Marcus. Not in a courtroom, not with lawyers present, just the two of us. I called him that evening. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. I said, we need to talk, just you and me. Come by the house tomorrow." He didn't respond. The next day, I waited. I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee that went cold while I stared at the door. He didn't come. But he did send a text. It said, "I don't think that's a good idea right now, Dad. Let's let the lawyers handle this." I stared at that message for a long time. He couldn't even face me. He was hiding behind legal documents and representatives because he knew deep down that what he was doing was indefensible. I typed back, "You're my son. You owe me a conversation." He didn't reply. I set my phone down and looked around the room, this house, these walls. The furniture Eleanor and I picked out together, the photos of our family on the mantel, Marcus smiling in half of them. How did it come to this? How did the boy I raised turn into someone who could look at me and see nothing but dollar signs? I didn't have an answer, and maybe I never would. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him win. The hearing was in 10 days, and I was ready. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Plain walls, fluorescent lights, a judge's bench that looked like it had been there for decades. I sat at a table with my lawyer, Lydia, beside me for support. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with his lawyer. He still wouldn't look at me. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and sharp eyes, called the hearing to order. She reviewed the petition, glanced at the documents both sides had submitted, and then looked directly at Marcus. She said, "Mr. Marcus, you've filed a petition claiming your father is no longer competent to manage his own affairs. This is a serious allegation. I'm going to need substantial evidence to support it." Marcus's lawyer stood and presented their case. She talked about isolation, about grief, about the risks of an elderly man living alone without oversight. She made it sound reasonable, compassionate even. But she didn't have specifics. No missed bills, no medical emergencies, no actual evidence of decline. When it was our turn, my lawyer stood and methodically dismantled every claim. He presented the cognitive screening. He called Dr. Patel to testify, and the doctor confirmed under oath that I showed no signs of impairment. He called my financial advisor, who testified that I'd been managing my investments competently and independently. He called Dorothy, my neighbor, who said I beat her at chess just last week and that I was sharper than most people half my age. Then he called Lydia. She took the stand, her voice steady but emotional. She said, "My father is one of the most capable people I know. He's been through hell losing my mother, but he hasn't fallen apart. He's still here, still strong, and my brother has been trying to manipulate this situation for his own benefit." Marcus's lawyer objected, but the judge let her continue. Lydia said, Marcus asked me questions about my father, leading questions designed to make it sound like Dad was declining. And when I told him Dad was fine, he kept pushing. He wanted me to say something was wrong, even when there wasn't. The judge made a note. Then my lawyer presented the emails between Marcus and Trevor Calloway. He walked the judge through the timeline, the planning, the appraisals, the clear intent to liquidate assets before I had any say. He said, Your Honor, this isn't about concern for a father's well-being. This is about financial gain, and the evidence is overwhelming. The judge turned to Marcus. She said, Do you have anything to say in your defense? Marcus stood. For the first time that day, he looked at me. He said, I was trying to help. I thought I was doing the right thing. I held his gaze. I didn't say anything. I just let him see me, see that I was still here, still standing. The judge said, Helping would have involved a conversation with your father, not a legal ambush. She reviewed her notes for a long moment. Then she said, Petition denied. There is no evidence to support a finding of incompetence. This case is dismissed. I felt Lydia's hand on my shoulder. My lawyer smiled. Across the aisle, Marcus's lawyer gathered her papers quickly, her expression tight. Marcus just sat there, staring at the table. The judge wasn't finished. She said, Mr. Marcus, I am also ordering a full review of your communications with Mr. Trevor Calloway. If there's evidence of elder financial exploitation, this court will refer the matter to the district attorney. Marcus's head snapped up. His lawyer started to object, but the judge cut her off. She said, This hearing is adjourned. We stood. Lydia hugged me, my lawyer shook my hand, and I walked out of that courtroom with my head high. Outside, Marcus caught up to me. He said, What, Dad? Wait. I stopped, turned. He looked smaller somehow. Tired. He said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I said, you meant every bit of it. You just didn't think I'd fight back. He didn't have a response to that. I said, You're my son. I would have done anything for you, and you tried to erase me. He looked down. He said, I was in debt. I made some bad investments. I thought if I could just access some of the equity in the house. I held up a hand. I said, I don't want to hear it. You didn't come to me and ask for help. You tried to take everything. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Then he said, Can we fix this? I said, But I don't know, but it's not going to be today. I walked away. Lydia was waiting by my car. She said, You okay? I said, I will be. We drove back to my house in silence. When we got there, she made coffee and we sat in the living room. The same room where I'd first read those documents and felt my world tilt. Now, sitting here, I felt steady again. Lydia said, What are you going to do now? I said, Live my life on my terms. She smiled. She said, Good. Before she left, she hugged me tight and said, I'm proud of you, Dad. I said, Thank you for believing me. She said, Always. After she was gone, I sat alone in the quiet house. I thought about Eleanor, about the letter she'd left me. Don't let anyone make you feel small. I hadn't. I'd fought back, and I'd won. But the victory felt complicated. I'd lost my son, at least for now. Maybe forever. That hurt in ways I didn't have words for. But I'd kept my dignity, my independence, my life. And that mattered. I picked up my phone and opened the letter I'd written to Ethan, my grandson. I read it again, then saved it in a folder marked For Later. Someday he'd be old enough to understand, and when that day came, I'd make sure he knew the truth, that his grandfather wasn't a victim, that I'd refused to be erased, that I'd stood up, fought back, and won. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved to live my life with dignity, and no one, not even family, had the right to take that away. I looked around the room one more time. This house, my house, still mine, I was still here. And I wasn't going anywhere. Here's the lesson I learned through all of this. Family is supposed to protect you, not prey on you. And when someone tries to take your power, your voice, your very existence, you fight back, not with hatred, not with bitterness, but with clarity, evidence, and the unshakable belief that you deserve to be seen, heard, and respected. Betrayal from the people you love cuts the deepest, but surviving it, standing up to it, and reclaiming your life, that's where you find your strength. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you're too old, too tired, or too broken to fight for yourself. You're not, and you deserve better. I'm reading and replying to every comment under this post. Let me know what you would have done in my situation. And if this story meant something to you, please share it. Someone else out there might need to hear it.